Since the 2010 elections, in which Republicans did so well, particularly in the states, America's Republican Party has been laser focused on jobs, by which I mean abortion. In the Republican-controlled House of Representatives in Washington, the third bill that Republicans introduced upon gaining control of the House was an anti-abortion bill. See, it's H.R. 3. They do them in numerical order. Then the line in the sand over which Republicans threatened to shut down the whole federal government was their effort to defund Planned Parenthood. Now, in the second year of their majority in the House, congressional Republicans are still working on anti-abortion legislation all the time. They are fighting right now to restrict abortion rights in Washington, D.C., since Congress has some control over the district's affairs. That has led D.C. residents to stop by one Republican congressman's office last month with a long list of other more pressing issues he might take on if he cares so much about D.C., things like potholes and vermin infestations and parking tickets and so on. In the Republicans' presidential primary this year, that abortion above all else climate has led to a race in which not only did all the leading candidates say they would overturn Roe versus Wade to make having an abortion a criminal act, but beyond that, all of the leading candidates for president on the Republican side this year said they supported personhood for fertilized eggs. It's a legal idea designed by the right to outlaw the most common forms of contraception used in the United States while also outlawing all abortions. That was at the federal level. At the state level, it has been an anti-abortion free-for-all since the 2010 elections, with more anti-abortion legislation being introduced and more being passed than at any time since it became a legal constitutionally protected right to get an abortion in this country in the early 1970s. So after that laser-like focus on jobs, by which I mean abortion, it seems like now, maybe, in this current news cycle, maybe, the pendulum is swinging back in the other direction. Or at least people who are on the other side of the issue from Republicans are starting to make some real noise about how far Republicans have swung the pendulum since the 2010 elections. Today in Michigan, for example, Republicans got a performance that they did not ask for, but they definitely did earn. As you may have heard, particularly on this show, last week, state Republicans banned two Democratic lawmakers, both women, from speaking on the floor of the Michigan House. It was the first time in anyone's memory that lawmakers had been censored like that. It began during a debate on a new omnibus Republican anti-abortion bill that expands the state's right to regulate abortion clinics out of existence. I mean, not accidentally, intentionally onerous regulations designed to shut down abortion providers. The measure passed in Michigan mostly along party lines, but during debate on the bill, female Democratic legislators argued against it vigorously. And one legislator used a word that got her sent to the penalty box by the Republicans in charge.
I have not asked you to adopt and adhere to my religious beliefs. Why are you asking me to adopt yours? And finally, Mr. Speaker, I'm flattered that you're all so interested in my vagina, but no means no.
For that comment, and a few others from Democrats that day, the Republican majority floor leader in Michigan banned State Representative Lisa Brown and another woman Democratic legislator from speaking. That was last week. Fast forward to today, and this was the rather incredible scene outside the Michigan Capitol. Playwright and activist Eve Ensler there to perform her most famous work, the Vagina Monologues. The state legislator whose comment caused all the hullabaloo in the headlines, she and 9 other legislators starred in the play. They used the word that must not be named more than 100 times. So that's Michigan. In Virginia last week, home of Governor Ultrasound, the state's Board of Health there did something shocking. The State Board of Health in Virginia last week decided not to make it more difficult for abortion providers to operate in Virginia. Well, Virginia Republicans had wanted to do the same kind of thing they're trying to do in Michigan. They had wanted to pass intentionally onerous regulations, specifically targeting abortion providers to put them out of business. But the State Board of Health unexpectedly voted to block the Republicans' move. The State Board of Health voted to exempt existing abortion providers from the new rules that seem specifically driven to shut them all down. The board made this vote against the advice of Virginia's radically anti-abortion Republican Attorney General. The decision now goes to Governor Bob McDonnell for review. So that's going on in Virginia. In Florida, over the weekend, 1,200 mayors from all over the country gathered for the 80th annual Conference of Mayors. At the end of the three-day conference, the mayors issued a list of adopted resolutions that they all voted on. Things like anti-violence programs and drug treatment and education. Also on the subject of reproductive rights, the mayor's resolution recognized 10 different ways in which women's health care was being restricted and women's rights were being impinged across the country. The resolution affirmed the importance of women's reproductive rights, and it called for Congress and the states to improve women's access to safe and comprehensive reproductive health care. So that's the nation's mayors. But wait, there's more. Today, a group of Catholic nuns launched a bus tour of 9 states from Iowa to Virginia. They're calling it Nuns on the Bus. Nuns drive for faith, family, and fairness. After the Vatican said in April that nuns in America are spending way too much time on social justice issues and caring for the poor when they really ought to be focused on being good anti-abortion activists, the nuns decided no. The nuns decided instead to travel around in their bus now, talking about other things. They're now, for this week, for example, talking about how much the Republican Paul Ryan budget that Mitt Romney says he would adopt as president would hurt the poor and the sick and the people who nuns can't help but be nice to and be concerned about even when the church tells them to focus on other things. So whether or not all these developments mean that the pendulum really is swinging back, or people are at least getting mad about how far the pendulum has swung, I have one thing to say here personally, not as a TV show host here, but just as a person who happens to be related to some nuns. Don't mess with nuns. This is not a warning, it's not advice, it's not a threat. It is a fact that I have learned from personal experience. Ask anybody in my family. If you mess with nuns, you will lose every time. You will always regret messing with nuns. Joining us now is not a nun, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, a member of Congress from Florida, chair of the Democratic National Committee. Congresswoman, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Rachel. Great to be with you.
I realize that you are not Catholic. Do you agree with me that one should not mess with nuns?
Absolutely. They would be way at the bottom of the list of the women or men that I'd want to mess with.
Yes, under any circumstances. Let me ask you, I mean, looking at all of those developments in turn, the Conference of Mayors resolution, obviously the mayors speak for a lot of Americans. The Virginia Board of Health.
And they're a nonpartisan group.
Absolutely. And also seen as a sort of technocratic group doing what's best for their constituents. The Virginia Board of Health defying what the Republicans were trying to do there. This outpouring in Michigan, thousands of people out on the steps of the Michigan State Capitol today in response to them shutting up those women legislators last week. And the nuns defying the Vatican and saying we're not going to be anti-abortion activists, we're going to do what we think is right. Do you think that it's right to cluster those and talk about the idea that there is a sort of reaction to what we've seen as the Republican agenda on reproductive rights and women's health for the past couple of years? Is there a backlash?
Well, I think there really appears to be, and you can take it all the way back to the beginning of this Congress when the Republicans took over the House and became the majority and introduced that bill you referenced, H.R. 3, which also, by the way, would have changed the definition of rape to mean only forcible rape. So, I mean, there has been this relentless attack on women and a relentless hyper-focus on women's reproductive rights, in spite of the fact that the number 1, 2, and 3 issue is creating jobs and getting the economy turned around. And so their obsession with women's bodies and controlling women's bodies has really seeped all the way down so deeply, and the extremism has seeped so deeply into the Republican Party that you've got state after state that is initiating this legislation, and so much so that yours and my generation, which has really benefited from having reproductive freedom for our entire lives and essentially has become complacent, now even women who are my girlfriends and probably your girlfriends who never pay attention are saying, okay, you know, this is enough to get me off my couch and out of my house and onto the lawn of a state capitol to fight back.
Well, in terms of strategy on these issues, I feel like the big dynamic in American partisan politics is that on the right, there's a conservative movement that operates independently of the Republican Party, and they constantly are pulling the Republican Party to the right, demanding orthodoxy, purification, and they're doing that whether the Republicans are in power or not. They're always just exerting however much power they can. Well, it's an external force to the party, at least. In the Democratic Party, there isn't a progressive movement that has the same kind of effect on the Democratic Party. And so Democrats don't move that much on the issue. They're not drawn to the left the same way that Republicans are drawn to the right. Because of that, Abortion rights are a litmus test for Republicans. There are almost no pro-choice Republicans left. There's a lot of pro-life Democrats. There's a lot of anti-abortion rights Democrats. And so how can the Democratic Party say to women who are upset by the Republicans' agenda, come to us, when there are so many Democrats running for office right now and holding important elected office right now who are against abortion rights?
Because we are the big tent party, and we welcome a diversity of points of view. And you oftentimes see Democrats that are anti-choice that aren't making that the top of their legislative agenda. So there's a difference between someone who simply has a personal view that is different than the majority of our party, and someone who says, I'm going to Washington or I'm going to the state capitol to make limiting abortion rights my #1 priority. And that's, we're tolerant and respectful of a diverse point of view. The Republicans are not. And on top of that, they nominate candidates for president like Mitt Romney who want to take it even further. I mean, support personhood amendments, and who, when it comes to the issues important to women, like paycheck fairness and the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, won't even take a position and say whether or not that they would allow those things to become law. It's the dramatically out of step, out of touch extremism that exists from the top to the bottom of the Republican Party is really, I think, finally startling and shocking to women, enough to get many women who aren't normally involved and engaged off the sidelines.
I think that key issue about intensity, both among elected officials and also intensity among people who care about it, I think
Enough's
that you're
enough.
right on that. Debbie Wasserman Schultz, chair of the Democratic National Committee, member of Congress from Florida, and again, not a nun.
Not a nun.
What you're talking about. It's nice to see you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.